It's great to have such a full house here today for what's going to be a very interesting conversation, and I'm hoping a very lively panel, and we want lots of interaction and lots of questions from the floor and also interaction amongst the panel. It's as has been mentioned, today we're going to have a conversation about the alliance and can it adapt and endure. And as you know, last night, Foreign Minister Penny Wong said in her speech that securing our region today requires modernising the legacies of the great Labor greats, Curtin, Whitlam and Evatt, prioritising alliance, region and rules. She said the United States is our closest ally, our principal strategic partner and our largest source of foreign investment. We share values and ideals, and our alliance is underpinned by mutual respect for each other's sovereignty and also national interests. The Indo-Pacific would not have enjoyed long periods of stability and prosperity without the United States and its security guarantee to the region. And as she said, as I've said before, American leadership remains indispensable. It is the great builder of alliances and networks, essential for balance in a multipolar region. So they're the comments that kind of frame, from the Minister last night, today's conversation, where we will be exploring the changing character of the alliance and also the mix of AUKUS in all that, and what the Minister called last night the modernising of the relationship with the alliance. How the alliance might be tested by a second Trump administration or a strategic crisis in the Indo-Pacific, US expectations of Australia, Australian expectations of the US, and also how we can future-proof the alliance, assuming it is, and to ensure it will be enduring. That is assuming that we want it to be enduring, and is there an alternative if we don't actually have an alliance? So I'm joined by a terrific panel of experts with, as I said, a diverse range of views on the alliance. And so thank you very much for being here today, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. To my right, my immediate right, is Professor Peter Dean, who's Director of Foreign Policy and Defence from the US Studies Centre. Dr. Lavina Lee, a friend of mine, a former member of the ASPI Council and also a senior lecturer at the Macquarie University. Next to Lavina, we've got Professor Mike Green, who's Professor and Chief Executive Officer of the US Studies Centre as well. And finally, my former mentor when I was very, very young at Attorney General's, and Allan Behm, who is Director International and Security Affairs Program for the Australia Institute. Can you please join with me in welcoming our fabulous panel? Now, each panellist will make a 5-minute opening statement that will kind of frame our conversation today, and then we'll go into questions. And as I said, I'm very, very keen to get as many questions from the floor as possible. I know that there's a lot of interest in this subject, and I'm sure that there's lots of questions and thoughts and comments on the issue and the issues that will be raised today. So I'm going to limit my intervention, allow for the panel to have make their statements and also to discuss amongst themselves, but I'm really keen to draw from the floor as much as possible with questions. So if we could start, Peter, with you for a 5-minute opening statement. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for coming along in the last panel of our session after lunch. So you're all, strategic stayers, got strategic resilience. I think this notion of a changing character of the alliance is really important, but I would argue there's been a series of pivot points in time where the character of the alliance has changed. But I would actually argue that what we're seeing now is not just a change to the character, but a change to some of the fundamental underlying nature of the alliance of which it's been built on for so very long. And this pivot point started around 2020 and has sort of been solidified with the AUKUS agreement in 21 and of course the DSR in 2023. What makes this time so different is the acknowledgement of some fundamental changes said to that nature. The first, I will though outline just a couple of quick continuities. So what is basically changing the same? Well, the focus on our region, on the Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific, which has always been central to the alliance at its fundamental core, has changed. An emphasis within that partnership on Multilateralism is also there, but there's a change to the character of that. It's more seen through minilateralism now. So AUKUS, the Quad, the trilateral security dialogue with Japan, etc. And of course, for us and the relationship, a reliance on US extended nuclear deterrence. They're sort of in place. But there are changes to the fundamental nature. The first, and I think the most important, is an end to US primacy in the Indo-Pacific. US relative decline and the rise of a more multipolar regional order and a return to strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific. This is the most significant change. This is the first time that we've been in a situation like this going back to the period of the Second World War. So it is very, very different in that regards. This means there's a bit of a paradox to this change at the moment. So the US, as we heard from the Foreign Minister last night and Secretary Moriarty here yesterday, is more important than ever to Australia. At the same time, it's in a period of relative decline as the rise of other powers, China and India and others, occurs in our region. And our little asterisk we'll put up the top is, of course, the potential return of another Trump administration at the end of the year. We've also then, as a result of this, moved from a reliance in the nature of the alliance on unilateral US conventional deterrence in our region to integrated or collective deterrence. And you see this in the US strategy, their NSS and NDS in 21. That is reflected in the Japanese national security strategy and defence strategy we saw in 2022 and in the Australian Defence Strategic Review in 2023. From reliance on the US being able to unilaterally provide that conventional deterrence to the need to move to a collective deterrence posture. And of course, the alliance had been based on what we call, and we've heard a few times last couple of days, the rules-based international order. Well now, what do those rules and those norms look like in a multipolar region? I think we're left with two really big open questions to the nature of the relationship. The alliance has been built on a commitment to open global markets and free trade. Trump put a dent to that, COVID's put a dent to that, and also what we're seeing is the development of a new economic system globally, the rise, the return of geopolitics into economics, and where is economic security taking us? Where are trusted supply chains going? Where is the economic system moving to? And that's an unsure thing. And the other one, of course, as a part of that, is the fact that the US doesn't have a multilateral trade approach in the Indo-Pacific. So there's like a hole in the centre of US strategy in our region. And where that goes, we don't know. The other one is, foundationally has been support for liberal democracy as a part of the alliance. In light of January 6th and the potential return of Trump internally in the US, we don't know where that's going. But more importantly for both of our countries, where does the role of democracy promotion play in a more multipolar region? And that's, I think, is an unresolved question at the moment. So I think we have a change, as I said, to the character, but more importantly, some elements, some fundamental elements to the nature of the relationship is changing. And I'll just add a couple of things quickly on what I think we should do about that. At the public level, the DSR has a section under resilience, and its very first dot point says an informed public. And I would argue we're not there yet, and we still have a long way to go. I'll give one example. I honestly believe the government hasn't explained to the people of Australia the strategic rationale behind AUKUS. It is largely at a public level being sold to our communities as a jobs creation scheme, and it's not a very effective jobs creation scheme. That's the retail politics of it. AUKUS is happening for strategic reasons, and Australia is the country that requested those capabilities out of our alliance partner and the United Kingdom as well. It's also not happening over, for instance, one of the key flashpoints in the region over Taiwan. We have a broken public debate in this country over Taiwan. It's built around gotcha moments to politicians and around this false sense that somehow we'll be unreflectively fighting a war with the United States, that it starts for primacy in the region, over Taiwan. I just don't buy that as a sophisticated argument, and it's a broken public debate. Institutionally, we do need to reassess how the alliance works from joint planning at one end to extended nuclear deterrence on the other. The government, I think, has made some good starts around this with reasserting of the statements around sovereignty within the alliance, around full knowledge and concurrency. But we also have a long way to go. We also need to talk more broadly about the alliance within the context of our other partnerships in the region, such as with Japan and such as this sort of web or network of relationships is developing. So the DSR is really clear on this. It talks about the alliance within the framework of defence partnerships more broadly and how that has to change and be more inclusive of other minilateral and other groupings that we're talking about. Politically, I think there needs to be a much greater focus on interests and ends. Concepts and language like an unbreakable alliance, a forever alliance, just does not sit comfortably with me and does not sit comfortably with how the alliance will have to change and how it will have to work in different ways. And if we go back and look at the Hawke government, for instance, it fought with the Reagan government a lot over the Star Wars initiatives and others publicly, but was able to maintain the alliance because we can disagree and agree with America at the same time. It's not one or the other. And the way that the Hawke government and the Howard government had trade difficulties with the United States. Mike will tell you, whatever you do, don't bring up sugar. Don't ask him about sugar, whatever you do. And at the government level, I actually think one of the things we're missing is the ability to tie our relationship with the United States and how that's changing, not just into the Defence Strategic Review and National Defence Strategy, but into an absent national security strategy. We've heard a lot in recent days about food security, cyber security, human security, economic security. We're missing a critical element of how we tie all this in together. So as the DSR says, it has to be about a whole of nation and a whole of government agreement. And I think that's a sort of a glaring hole in how we tie the modern version of the alliance together with the modern challenges that we face. And where, of course, does the alliance fit in with new concepts of self-reliance in national defence? We had a very good conception of self-reliance in the defence of Australia, the old model, but we need a much more sophisticated public relationship about what self-reliance in the new model of national defence looks like. And the DSR points this out. It's going to have to change, and we have to have more of a focus on self-reliance for the way Australia commits into regional security and providing good, positive goods into regional security. So I think that's a conversation that really has to happen in the public, but also amongst the policy community.
Thanks, Peter. And there's lots of questions from me, but I'm going to try and keep it to a minimum so that everyone in the audience can have a say. But yeah, thank you so much for that great setup. Lavina.
Thank you, Gai, and thanks to the NSC for inviting me to speak here today. Now, in my brief remarks, I want to focus on two questions that I think are interrelated. First, the Australia-US alliance has long enjoyed bipartisan support on both sides of the Pacific. Is this something that we can assume will endure into the future? In many ways, the alliance appears to be in good shape. There has been a solid continuity of rhetoric and policy on the alliance with the change of government in Australia in 2022. However, the AUKUS partnership has stirred awkward questions about the benefits versus the costs of the alliance, not least within the Labor Party itself. Why do we need nuclear-propelled submarines with a price tag of $368 billion? China is unlikely to attack Australian territory, so therefore, how can it be a security threat to Australia? By acquiring these submarines, isn't Australia implicitly committing to, in advance, to the United States to use these submarines in a war with China in the Taiwan Strait or elsewhere in South or East Asia, with the underlying assumption being that this is not in Australia's interest? The government has dismissed critics like Paul Keating as being out of touch with the current threats Australia faces and having an outdated and benign view of Chinese objectives. Prime Minister Albanese has spoken at the Shangri-La dialogue about the risks of war in Taiwan and the need to build deterrent capabilities to avoid it. Yet the government has not robustly made the case to the Australian public on why China is a threat to Australian interests. And I think Peter and I agree on that, even if the likelihood of a direct attack on Australian territory in peacetime is unlikely. The deliberate toning down of criticism of Chinese behaviour and policy in order to stabilise the bilateral relationship makes it very difficult to have these types of conversations. Australia has already experienced economic coercion from China, which gives us a taste of what a hierarchical Chinese order would entail. Coercion could come in the form of disruption to our supply and trade routes in international waters. In wartime, Australia is already in range of Chinese rapidly advancing ballistic missile capabilities. Australia has no means to shape the regional balance in our favour or any kind of strategic equilibrium in the absence of its alliance with the United States. We need to help the United States to remain present in the region and to be able to project power within it. We need hard power and powerful friends to be a shaper rather than a taker. Without both, we would sit at the level of countries in Southeast Asia that have in truth little means to influence regional affairs. This takes me to the second related question of the future of the alliance, should Donald Trump win the presidency in November. It is common to say that Donald Trump is transactional, but all alliances are largely transactional. What is different about Trump is that he has no historical romanticism about US alliances, whether with Australia or with NATO, Japan, South Korea. What he sees is that the post-World War II model of free riding on American military strength no longer applies with the rise of China as a peer competitor and Russia as a determined spoiler. A Trump presidency would bring with it a brutal assessment of what we bring to the table. At present, and with additions to our maritime capabilities not likely until 2033 to 2035, Australia can offer the United States useful strategic real estate. It is an open question whether a Trump presidency will think this is a sufficient contribution to the alliance, and how he will look at the absence of a significant increase in defence spending until 2027. The nightmare for allies is that the United States won't be there to defend us when we need them. The US nightmare is that its allies won't have the capability or resolve to be with them in a possible war. Allies are used to essentially free riding on the United States, to look to the United States to expend blood and treasure on our behalf. In a situation where US primacy no longer exists, the Trump administration is likely to make brutal calculations about whether allies are worth defending. Now, I think it's also important to separate Trump's personal characteristics from what he complains about and demands from allies. In his first term, he complained about Germany deepening its dependence on Russian gas, of NATO countries not meeting their pledge to spend 2% of GDP on defence, or that Taiwan was not adequately preparing to defend itself. In hindsight, these were not unreasonable complaints, and if responded to, would have left these countries in a better position than they are in now. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, Lavina, particularly reminding us of Trump's views and comments in the past on those issues and what also transpired. So thanks so much for that, and thanks for that presentation. Mike, can I go to you now? Just in having a conversation with all the panellists in advance of today, Mike's going to give us a US perspective on it, or assess what you think the US is going to be thinking about all of the issues that we're addressing today. So over to you.
Thank you. I'll try to say something about what 330 million Americans think about the alliance, what Donald Trump thinks about the alliance, and what we should be thinking about if we care about the alliance, which is frankly not what is always on the top of the agenda. So what do Americans think? As I said, there are over 330 million Americans. But if you look at the polls over the last 3, 4, 5 years, you find consistently, with a variety of methodologies, some of the most robust support for US alliances ever, particularly with Australia and the Indo-Pacific, but NATO as well. When I was at CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, before moving here, we did a public opinion survey, and we asked the American public, how much risk should the United States take to defend allies threatened by China. And 10 was highest amount of risk, and 0 was no risk. The mean for Australia was 9, which meant about 30-40% of Americans were saying whatever it takes. And if you know polling, if you study polling, Americans tend, any country, any democracy tends, when asked about war, to say no thank you. So the polls look pretty strong. Congressional support, bipartisan. The AUKUS caucus is robust. I was in Washington a week ago. I went searching for opposition to AUKUS in the Congress. I couldn't find it. There are technical problems. People are worried about export controls. They're worried about cybersecurity, about workforce and supply chains for American submarines. But the principle that Australia should get the most significant transfer of American military technology since 1957, when we transferred the same technology to the Royal Navy, you didn't find opposition. It has built, in particular, since Xi Jinping came to power, and really since Ukraine. The 2012 timeframe, when the public was asked, is our future in Asia more connected to China or to our traditional allies like Japan and Australia, the public was somewhat split in 2012. Now, when that question is asked, it's about 80 or 90% are allies. The Biden administration's first Indo-Pacific strategy mentioned allies and partners 33 times. China 3 or 4. So pretty robust. And the interesting thing, and this is a bit different from Australia, is when you break down the demographics, younger Americans are actually the most pro-alliance. And I have my theories on why that is, but...
Can we explore that?
Sure.
After,
I mean, it has a lot to do with Donald Trump criticizing alliances. And late night comedians making fun of him, and yeah. But in general, you can connect it to younger Americans being more open to trade, to the United Nations and international institutions, to international engagement. They're just more used to and comfortable with the world and alliances. It's also part of that worldview. So pretty robust. Not that there are, no problems, but pretty robust in historical context. So that raises the question: what about the Donald? Donald Trump is, as former Secretary of Defense Mattis said, the most disruptive, divisive president in our lifetime, but maybe in history. Abraham Lincoln was divisive, but he didn't want to be, so that doesn't count. Donald Trump deliberately tries to divide for political gains. And that's, as an American, I can tell you, that's unnerving. If you're an ally, that's unnerving. Some perspective, though. It's an attitude, not a strategy. Donald Trump does not sit in his Mar-a-Lago office with a big flow chart on how he's going to actually reimagine American alliances. It's an attitude. It's a performative thing. His last term, he was checkmated constantly within his own administration, but also by Republicans, his own party, in Congress. He said, I'm going to withdraw troops from Korea, threw it out, didn't tell anyone he was going to say it. Republicans put into the Defense Authorization Act an amendment saying you cannot use money appropriated by Congress to pull troops out of Korea. This game happened a lot. It's already starting to happen. Republicans are already putting things into legislation in anticipation of that game. The Biden administration's major Asia policy pillars, the Quad, free and open Indo-Pacific, infrastructure financing, actually started in the Trump administration. And even the most kind of hardcore isolationist America firsters are often Asia firsters. A good example is J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio, who went to the Munich Security Conference, attacked the Europeans, warned that if Donald Trump's president will not coddle NATO anymore. And he said, we have to do this to pivot to the Pacific. And there's a long history in American politics of the America First movement, including in 1940, including during the NATO debates, actually being an Asia First movement, which we can talk about if you like. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be easy or pleasant for Australia if Donald Trump wins. I would be worried particularly about the transatlantic relationship. You cannot have a strategy for resilience in this region without Europe. I was a bit surprised the foreign minister, in an otherwise very strategic speech, never mentioned Europe. And a Trump administration will be ideologically hostile to NATO in a way it will not be to Asian alliances. So things like that will matter. But I think Japan and Australia, India, the Quad countries will be well positioned. Are we worrying about the right thing? If I were Japanese or Australian or Korean, I'd probably be worrying about abandonment. But if you look at the facts and the history, it's probably not the major issue that we will be confronting. I think the major issue will be how we make the alliance fit for purpose in a contested Indo-Pacific along the lines that Pete was describing. The Defense Strategic Update 2 years ago said Australia no longer has the luxury of 10 years warning time. Essentially, warning time is, they didn't say zero, did they, Pete? But it's basically zero. So when you think about American alliances where the warning time is zero, you get Korea, you get NATO. The motto of the US forces in Korea is, we fight tonight, because you have to be ready to fight tonight. Joint and combined command structure. We don't have that with Australia. We don't have anything really close to it, despite Five Eyes and the intimate security relationship. Japan, if you follow the news from Kishida's trip, is upgrading, and the US is upgrading our command in Japan, probably to a 4-star level like Korea and NATO. And the Japanese are embracing it. They want that connectivity and that jointness. I think this is a big issue that's coming down the pike for Australia. The other thing, and Andrew Hastie in his excellent remarks, and Pete and Lavina and others have flagged this, if we're going to be that intertwined, that interdependent, it is a little bit of a problem that our narratives about China are so different. As my friend Rich can tell you, if you go to Washington and to an event like this, the event could be on the coffee production in Guatemala, and China would come up 10 times. You can go to a strategic event in Australia and for 3 hours never hear the word China, even though everyone knows we're talking about China. So there's a discourse disconnect that's understandable, but is going to be a problem as we start making some of these hard choices. And a number of speakers have referred to that. So I would like to see the US articulate a little more carefully what it means to live in Asia with China. The administration has not been able to do that. I'd like to see the Australian side articulate what Pete and Lavina said, which is, why are we doing this? It's not to create jobs. So this is an issue which a conference like this really can kind of jumpstart.
Thanks. Again, lots of questions, but I will refrain. Over to you, Alan, for your remarks, please.
Good. Thank you very much, Gai. Good afternoon, everybody. I thought I might begin by warning you that you put your hard hats on, please, because I'm going to throw a few grenades into here and liven you up a bit. We've had China mentioned a couple of times already this afternoon, and quite a number of times during this conference, and we do have quite a fixation with the China so-called threat. And that's very convenient. It helps us focus, maybe focus on the wrong thing, but it does help us focus. But I want to suggest to you that threat is not the basis on which we ever do our real strategic planning. Our strategic planning is actually fashioned around risk and the way in which we perceive risk, the way in which we quantify risk, and then the way in which we think about how we're going to respond to risk in advance of its occurrence. Now, we all do this all the time. We take out insurance policies. And we take them out. We all complain about having to pay too much, but we've got some idea about what we're spending our money on. And that is that the cost of having an insurance policy outweighs the disbenefit of your house falling over or having a multi-car motor car accident or whatever. And if we think seriously about risk, I want to suggest to you that the greatest strategic risk confronting Australia at the moment is not China. That by a considerable margin, the greatest strategic risk confronting Australia at the moment is the political and social collapse of the United States. Because that would constitute an overwhelming and existential risk for Australia. We would be absolutely on our own, And frankly, we would be, as Andrew Hastie pointed out to us this morning, we would be nowhere, we would stay nowhere, and would have no idea what to do or where to go. Now, just let me talk a little bit about the nature of that risk of internal political and social collapse in the United States. If one looks at Australia and the United States as a pair of countries, you'll see that we have extraordinarily similar antecedents. We are very similar countries. We're not the same. We have quite different things, different ways of expressing things. We have different values to the extent that we share any values at all. We have very similar interests. But if you look at our institutional and structural alignments between Australia and the United States, you'll find that there are probably no two countries which are actually more similar than Australia and the United States. And in a book I'm putting out in July, it'll be on the 4th of July that it'll be published. It's my contribution to Independence Day. I'm pointing out in that book, through quite a long series of chapters, just how deep these historical, institutional and structural alignments are across culture, defence, economy, and a series of the law, and a series of other sort of functions in our society. And that's a very important point that you've got to know from the very beginning when you're talking about Australia's alliance with the United States. This is not an alliance between dissimilar countries. This is an alliance between highly similar countries. And yet, what do we do about that? And the big challenge that we confront as Australians, if the social and political collapse of the United States is a risk that would have existential consequences. And by the way, Trump is simply a symptom of that. Trump won't cause it, because many of the fracture lines are there already, and they're deepening in the United States. And I'm not the only commentator to say that. There's a vast literature on this. But what are we doing about it? That's the question. And I think that what we're doing is nothing. We're fretting about China. We're fretting about nuclear submarines. We fret about a lot of things, but our real interest is in making sure that to the extent that we're able to, we turn a dependency relationship into a partnership relationship so that our voice as a partner of the United States works with the United States in both its self-definition and in its definition as a global leader, which is naturally a partner for us. So don't understand me as saying I want to see the alliance disbanded or chucked overboard. Complete opposite. I want to see it strengthened. But it will not be strengthened if we ignore what the internal threats to it are. I mean, what happened to Tsarist Russia? Was it conquered by another country? No, it fell apart. That empires fall apart rather than get conquered. And that's something that we need to think about. Now, I do have a list of things that I think we could do about it. I think, for example, in our relationships with the Congress, Australia could be much more active and much more active in its relationship with some 20 or so of the state legislatures of the United States, where we have some really significant ongoing cultural, physical, economic and so on relationships. Many people in Australia will say to me, well, we'd never get away with that, We couldn't do that. It's just little old Australia, We go along to US parties, but gosh, to think that we might have some influence on them, God, they're too big. Well, there are two little countries which are enormously successful in the United States, Israel and Taiwan. And they invest enormous amounts in making sure that their interests are front and centre in the way in which the US legislature thinks. What I want to say is that US interests are front and centre in the way in which we would necessarily manage our relationship with the United States. So for me, the future of the alliance is not a future built around fear and threat. It's not certainly built around whether we end up going to war because of or against or whatever China or anybody else, whether there's a collapse on the Korean Peninsula or whether for some other reason we end up, as Australia has historically, in remote parts of the world. No. Our interest is in strengthening what is for us a relationship without alternative.
Thanks, Alan. Always interesting observations, and always creates a bit of frisson in the room. So I did tell you that this is a panel of people of diverse opinions, and you've got a little taste of that. So look, what I'm going to do now, as I said, I am very keen, because I'm sure there's a lot of interest in the room to ask questions. I'm going to hand over to the floor. I'll come back at the end. I'll allow myself about 5-10 minutes at the end to ask some of my own questions. But if we could, unfortunately that's much better. If we could, and when you're, I might do two or three at a time, so we can keep it pretty pacey, given the time of day it is, and after lunch. And if you could state your name and organisation and make the questions or comments short. Thank you. And to the point. This gentleman down here.
Colin Clark, Breaking Defence. What actions should the Australian government take in the next 18 months to improve its relations with Congress and its relations with the Australian people, viz. AUKUS?
Okay, thanks. Sorry, which organisation were you from?
Breaking Defence.
Okay, great. So actions on AUKUS in the next 12 months? 18. Yeah, 18. Up the back, yes.
Hello, I'm Eamon McNamara. I'm a master's student here at the college. My question is based on there's clear fears about a Trump presidency, but what might we expect from 4 more years of Biden in the Indo-Pacific and in our region?
Thank you. And just one down here.
Christian Lorpich from Canada. So it's puzzling that you didn't mention the 4 schools of US foreign policy, because rather than talking about this as a shift to Trump or whatever, really what we're seeing is just a rebalancing of currents that have been there in US foreign policy for 200 years. And what we simply see is the shift away from a primarily Wilsonian multilateral sort of current during the Cold War to sort of a balancing, and the voices that we hear from Trump have been there really since the end of the Cold War. And the reason I bring this up is because there's so much focus on Trump, but the reality is, even if Biden gets reelected, all we get is 4 more years, because Biden is the last of the transatlantic generation. So we're seeing a substantial structural shift in the way the United States is going to relate to its allies, irrespective of which political party or which political candidate. It's just a matter of, are we going to get it right away, or are we going to get it in 4 years' time? And so the risk for Australia and for Canada is effectively the same risk, that after the Cold War, Australia and Canada came up with this concept of the traditional, the conventional middle powers as a way to give ourselves a voice in world affairs, because the risk was always that we're geostrategically irrelevant to world affairs. And so we shape world affairs through the United States. And so the greatest risk to Australia, as to Canada, is that we're going to become irrelevant and that we're going to be alone in a very dangerous world.
So, question on that, or
Well, I think we're having a very transactional and sort of tactical conversation. And what I'm trying to kind of point out is that these are broader strategic trajectories to which both countries have been reacting, rather than attempting to shape not just the external environment, threat environment, but also, I think, as you rightly pointed out, the greatest threat to our interests are actually the internal structural shifts that neither our decision makers nor our populations are realizing.
Okay, so we'll get the panel to comment on that. Thank you. All right. So we've got here actions on AUKUS for the next 18 months. What does 4 years of Biden look like? Should that happen? And also just the comments on the internal challenges. Do you want to start, Peter?
Well, I think I'll hand over the internal ones to the guy on the panel who's written a book on US strategy in Asia. It's the kind of the definitive volume. But on AUKUS in Congress, I'm very much one respect, I agree with Alan in the importance of the relationship with the United States and the congressional relationship. We have one of the best congressional liaison officers of any embassy in Washington, DC. It's been going for decades and decades now. We heavily invest in that type of relationship. And speaking to the last 3 or 4 ambassadors personally, they all talk about the level and depth of their personal engagement with Congress. But I take Alan's point, like the Taiwanese and the Israelis are world class at it, and we can always do more. I'll point out here the 100 Years of Mateship campaign. Now, every time I hear that or say that, I do have to say I want to reach for a bucket. That said, we were not the audience for that. The US administration and Congress at the time were, and it was a highly effective campaign during the last Trump presidency. It was highly effective at raising the consciousness in amongst members of Trump's administration and Congress about the relationship and importance of Australia, and it worked. So the question would be, what's the plan for the next iteration of that? On AUKUS, quickly, a couple of things, and I've said this a number of times. The government, starting with the Prime Minister, needs to come and give a speech about AUKUS that is definitive on the strategic rationale that doesn't mention jobs once. Because it's not about jobs, it's about the strategic rationale, and that needs to be clearly articulated to the Australian public, or a document needs to be put out by the government that clearly states that. There's a lot of conjecture happening in the debate around AUKUS based on a bit of an information vacuum that the government, and this is both governments, the Morrison government did this and the current government doing it, they're not filling that vacuum properly and making definitive statements to the Australian public to have the debate on the basis of. And I think that's a really important move that they have to make and they have to focus around. It can't be just a jobs program. It's one of the most inefficient jobs program in Australian history, but it's actually not about jobs. It's about the strategic environment we place, and it's actually about developing asymmetric capabilities for Australia to affect its own sovereign national defence. That's what it's really about, and it fits in exactly within the strategy laid out in the DSR. And that move to what type of asymmetric capabilities you need in the face of a region that does face the potential for major power conflict. And that's really central, but the government has to be more direct with the Australian people about that. On the Biden thing quickly, I think you've seen a lot of big setups in this term of the Biden administration. If they were elected, I think you see a greater push to execution. And an example of that is the change in Kurt Campbell's role, the change in Abe Denmark's role around AUKUS, the embedding that into the institutions in the United States, and the focus on execution. I think you can see more in minilateral, more enforced posture initiatives, a deepening of the relationship with Japan, a deepening of the relationship with Korea and with Australia and the Philippines. All that stuff we've started to see will accelerate, I think, in another 4 years of the Biden administration. And then the big question will be what happens with the CHIPS Act and the IRA and what impact that has on the economic security elements in relation to allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific region as well. I'll leave it there.
Great, thanks. Plenty there. Lavina.
Yeah, I probably would just tackle the question of what could we be doing more in Congress. I thought it was an interesting question, and Alan, I was provoked by your presentation. From my perspective, when I go to Washington, I'm actually marvelling at how well Australia has done in the last 18 months. In a sense, all this conversation about Kevin Rudd and how is Kevin Rudd an advocate, a good advocate for Australia. From where I sit and what I've heard, he has been an excellent advocate for Australia. And as Peter mentioned earlier, it was Australia who went to the United States and to the UK and said, we would like something like AUKUS. We would like nuclear submarines. So we've had to have a lot of initiative to push this through. And it's been, it didn't come from nowhere. And there was a lot of detractors, not just here, but in the United States. So if anything else, there's a lot to be celebrating, but also a lot to build upon from that. So you're not starting from a zero base. You've actually got a good starting point. I think in terms of what do we expect from 4 more years of Biden, from my point of view, it's not so much that, President Trump has a very brutal way of expressing things. But he often expresses underlying currents that others don't want to say in the same way. They might couch it in more diplomatic terms. But I think we are at the stage where all of our countries, the United States, but also allied countries, are being asked not just to plan, but now to deliver. And so even in the Biden administration, if we get another 4 years of Biden, we might be asked very similar questions as what Trump is asking of us, as in, what are we delivering? What are we contributing? Now, I also think there is, going back to that question of talking to the Australian public, I agree with Pete that I do think that's actually really an integral part of the conversation about delivery. I was always marveling at the conversation about AUKUS and the submarines and the price tag of $368 billion. You can't just throw figures like that out there without having a really good case for the threat situation that we have here. And why China really is a threat. And it's not just about whether they're going to invade us tomorrow, which is highly unlikely, but what is it about, if we can imagine into the future an environment where we do have a hierarchical Chinese order here, what would Australia's position in that hierarchical order be? And can we expect to have the same types of success and prosperity that we're used to now? Will the rules really be the same? And I say they won't. So I think for me, one of the major problems is that the government at the moment is prioritising the stabilisation of our relations with China. And in doing that, they are toning down the rhetoric specifically to achieve that. But some of these conversations are really hard conversations that you have to be very brutally honest about the threat of China. And at the moment, I think they're holding back, and that means that they can't have these conversations.
I would definitely not emulate Taiwan or Israel's lobbying approach in Washington. It's much higher profile than Australia's and probably less than half as effective. Australia's influence is broad, deep, and significant, and subtle. It's a bit of a problem for the government because I think most Australians don't see what Richard Fontaine or I see when we were in government, which is senior Australian military officers in Indo-Pacific. I went to the Pentagon 2 weeks ago to see an undersecretary. I was escorted by an Australian exchange official from defense. Israel and Taiwan don't have that. The level of intimacy, and it's not just Five Eyes, is deep. And so Taiwan and Israel would love to have what Australia has, would love to have it. And in some ways, both Taiwan and Israel have had approaches that have created blowback in the US political system. Australia has not. Over the next 18 months, first of all, Pete is right. I mean, the congressional office of the Australian Embassy in Washington's in the top 3 easily. And Kevin Rudd is working the Hill. But I do 2 things, frankly. If you want to really, do more to lock in support for AUKUS. One is identify who is going to be in a future Trump or Biden administration. I'm making my list. I know the embassy in Washington's making its list. A few of them are really scary. A lot of them are actually quite strong on alliances. And the US system has been successful in part because it's accessible for allies. You can find these people in think tanks. You know which members of Congress might become Secretary of Defense. You can take them to dinner. You can engage. The system welcomes from an ally like Australia that kind of engagement. So that's one thing. The other thing is the point I ended on, and Pete and Lavina mentioned, which is the relative silence about the reason for AUKUS and GUIO and forced posture has been noticed in Congress. I hear about it. If you want to...
The Australian silence?
Sorry?
The relative silence.
About the strategic imperative and urgency. There is not... the same level of urgency in the political discourse from the government here that you get from Japan or the Philippines or, of course, Taiwan or even Korea. And that gets noticed. So it's not a huge thing, but if you're looking for a to-do list, I'd put that on there. Think about the narrative. Yeah.
Sorry, can we just in terms of that, the urgency that you said that the Koreans and the Japanese have in their sort of discourse on the issue. So it's the narrative and the urgency. What do you mean by the urgency?
If you look at Prime Minister Kishida's visit yesterday to Washington in the trilateral summit with Marcos and Kishida and Biden, they described the threat environment and the challenge in very clear terms to their publics, and what the effort would require and why the risk, because there is risk, is necessary. They did so without demonizing China, without sort of, they never said threat, but they were pretty clear to the publics about what's at stake. Now, the problem with the U.S. rhetoric on China is it goes up to 11 right now. It's, if I can use the 80s movie metaphor, it's still a little too overheated, as I was saying. But there is, as I noted earlier, a very different sense of urgency in the discourse in Canberra compared to Tokyo, Taipei, Manila, and Washington. So on Biden, Bill Clinton criticized NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and then pushed it through. He had a foreign policy that was very UN-centric and multilateralist. In his second term, he, and I was involved in this, strengthened the U.S.-Japan alliance. Democrats in their second terms historically have moved in the direction of being more open-minded on trade agreements and trade. We're in a different environment, but that's something I'd look to and think about what might be possible. Digital trade agreement. I think TPP is too hard now in American politics. So that's a possibility for a second Biden term on that question. And on the question about the 4 schools of thought, you're echoing Walter Russell Mead's 4 schools of American foreign policy. Other historians have 2 schools. I have 5 fingers, so in my book on American foreign policy, I had 5 tensions. It's true for Australia, it's true for Japan, it's true for India. Most countries, particularly maritime powers, have an internal contradiction between their sort of maritime personality and their continental personality. And you could see it in the US debates until recently. You can see it very clearly in Australia's debates. Paul Keating, my friend Hugh White, talk about a bipolar Asia, US-China. Others, the government, talk about a multipolar Asia. Penny talked about a multipolar Asia, Japan, India. Do you align with your like-minded states? Do you try to cut a grand bargain with China? I mean, these schools of thought, these debates go way back. For the US, they go back for Australia. What's interesting is because of the metric pull of Xi Jinping's China, all of our internal maritime strategy, genes are lit up. Yeah, Korea has an Indo-Pacific strategy. The DSR, really stated Australia's maritime strategic orientation. Japan's been in for decades, and the Biden administration has shifted in a way Obama didn't. So, yes, Trump is disruptive, and in some ways unpredictable. The United States is not going to collapse, by the way, but I don't need to say that. But it is a wild card we really could do without. But the general current of American strategic thinking, and you see it in the polls, you see it in the Congress, is in the same direction as Australia, Japan, India, Korea, Philippines. We can thank Xi Jinping, but I think and Canada too, by the way. You can see how this is happening because of the structural level, systemic level challenges.
Alan, did you pass to you for comments? And
I think I'll let a lot of this just go by, but I'd like to respond to our colleague from Canada, I think. I think Canada and Australia we share a few problems. We're very apologetic kinds of countries. We're not terribly confident. We're quite powerful countries, actually. We're rich. We're both of us minimum in the G20. Canada's economy is actually a bigger economy than that of Russia, and Australia's is about the same. And yet both of us go around talking about how we're middle powers, whatever that means. I know where the middle is in the United Nations. It's around 56. And I think there is a big difference between Australia and Estonia. A lovely country though it is. So we're not confident in the use of our power, which means that we don't exercise our agency nearly as well as our power might suggest we could. And I've got just two quick observations about what we could do about that. Not so much about the causations of it. Some of the causations very similar, I think. But what we can do about it. The first thing I think we can do is to stop fretting nearly so much about the neighbourhood in which we both live and whether or not we're in a 2 or a 4 bedroom house. Because I can tell you this bit, every critical relationship is about the dynamics between the partners, not the environment in which they live. I know we're good in the Congress. I mean, I used to run the policy about the joint facilities in Australia. I know how the system works. What I'm saying is that we focus in our congressional work, as does Canada, on the things that we do together around the external world, the Five Eyes world. And we do it really, really well. We have a big uptake. And that's a game in which Israel and Taiwan can never get. Now, they're much better at the immediate dynamics of how a relationship between two parties works outside of the environment within which they live. I mean, Australia and the United States at this point, and I dare say Canada and the United States, if they were in a personal relationship, would be very well advised to go along and see the personal relationship guidance counsellor and work out something about how roles are actually distributed in the management of the relationship. What makes the relationship tick? And I'd like to say that what makes our relationship with the United States tick is that we have a lot of shared systems. In Australia's case, some of our systems are actually much better than the US systems. Our electoral system is a much better system. It would be impossible for us to generate a Trump. It would be impossible for Canada, which has got a looser system than ours, to generate a Trump. So all I'm saying is that what Canada and Australia really share is the tremendous advantage of being close through similarity and partnership, not through dependence.
Great, thanks, Alan. Okay, I've got a request from Mike Cohen, and then I will be taking questions from women after that, because the participation of women questions has been terrific throughout the duration of the conference, but I'm not seeing any. We've got one here and then another one up there, but yeah, we'll come to you. So, Mike, if you want to kick off.
Yes, thank you. Oh, it's working. Thanks very much. Thanks for fitting me in just in time. And I'm Mike Cohen. I'm a senior lecturer at the National Security College. I have a question about the imprecise and very vague US and Australian military commitments within the alliance. Obviously, we all know the Australians for a long time have been trying to get more specific commitments from the Americans to no avail. The way Congress is now, it seems like it's going to be very hard to get any more specific military commitments in any alliances through, and maybe NATO expansion is the exception to the rule there. And maybe AUKUS also shows that we don't need more specific commitments to get more US commitments to Australia. So my question is, should Australia and the Americans be working towards more specific military commitments within the ANZUS alliance? And by that I mean, of course, under these conditions, we do this, they do this. What sorts of specific military commitments do we think might be feasible? And then the next part, forgive me, Alan, what sorts of shocks might be necessary
One question.
for that to happen? And then finally, to Alan.
Ricky, that's three now.
Well, it's all part of the one question. Maybe this is the wrong question, and maybe should we not be pursuing this? And I'm thinking of Alan's remarks there. Thank you.
Finish your second question. Sorry, I didn't catch it. What was it?
Should we?
Because I was over talking your third.
Should we be seeking greater specificity in alliance commitments?
Yeah, I've got that one.
What shock by countries like, say, China might be enough to get us to do this? Or are we looking down the wrong hole, and should we be putting our efforts elsewhere, as Alan may be suggesting we should?
Hi, Jennifer Jackett from the National Security College. I wanted to pick up on the terminology of deterrence, which is often used, I guess, to justify something like the AUKUS partnership. I'm interested in the panel's views on whether or not the US and Australia have a shared sense of what deterrence is in a really specific way. Who are we deterring and from what?
Great, thanks, Jennifer. And there was, just up here, yes, in the middle.
Hi, my name's Alyssa, and I'm a final year international security studies student at ANU, and I'm currently undergoing a research placement at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute.
Oh, fantastic.
It's a lot of fun. So, Alan, you mentioned how we need to strengthen this relationship with our alternative. Michael, you mentioned the lack of warning time and how we could benefit from something like the joint command and control capabilities from Korea. Lavina, you mentioned that there's this dual nightmare, I guess, from Australia and from the US about not being able to fulfill commitments and not being able to be trustworthy and how to deal with that. And Peter, you mentioned the need for a more self-reliant approach to the US in the context of a shift in relationship. So my question, to draw away from AUKUS for a second, what role, if any, do you see the US Force Posture Agreement and initiatives playing in addressing all of these strategic concerns, specifically in North Australia? So is that something that Australia can viably leverage, and how would that work?
Okay, do you want to divvy up these questions? Or do you want to go for very briefly each? So we've got the...
I can be super fast.
Okay, you go super fast, and you've got the more deterrence.
Well, I'll talk about the deterrence stuff.
Yep.
I don't think there needs to be any change to the language of the treaty. I think that's being done by all the mechanisms that go beyond the treaty. I think there is, the treaty is the foundation, and built on top of that treaty is a whole series of mechanisms that operationalises the alliance, and it changes depending on the strategic circumstances. And you can see that changing right now with the US Force Posture Agreements in the north of Australia, with Surf West with the submarines, with more Australians being embedded into the US system, with changes to the way we're doing military planning and joint capability development through AUKUS. So these are all responses to those types of things, and I think that's where they'll sit. The deterrence question is a really, really good one, and I can only speak from my kind of personal experience, where I was done a couple of track 1.5 dialogues on deterrence. And what is absolutely amazing is that we now agree with the United States and with Japan and Australia, all agree on deterrence by denial, and the building of resilience. How you operationalise that, I would argue, we're yet to come to an agreement, because we come at it often from different angles and different ends. And that comes from our different strategic approaches, our different size. And in the US system, there's plenty of people in the US system with different views on this because of how big the US system is. For some, deterrence in our region is, can they fight and win over Taiwan tonight? For others, it's how you shape the region to provide that stability and how you do different types of deterrence sitting alone. I think the big lift in the relationship is we agree strategically on deterrence, but what are we going to do to operationalise that is in agreement and in accordance and self-reinforcing, while we also understand we'll have some differences of opinion of time on this. And I think those 2 points go to the other questions around self-reliance, and those things that comes into the fact of how we reconceive what we want to do within the alliance framework, what we want to use it for, and what is mutually reinforcing to ultimately what we're after, which the strategy is all about, and Penny Wong spoke about it last night, is a regional strategic balance. By maintaining that balance, which we have to positively contribute to, because the US can't do it for us anymore in the region, we have to positively contribute that, because that is what will maintain peace and security, that no power becomes the hegemon and is able to impose a hierarchical order.
Yep. Lavina?
Okay. Michael, those are really interesting questions. I was at a deterrence dialogue in Washington last year where these precise questions came up. I think in my own study of it, I find it remarkable that we have one line usually in our DSR or DSU that says we depend on America's extended nuclear deterrence or extended deterrence in general. But then there's really little specificity about under what circumstances can we rely on it, what would we be asked or called upon to do to support it. And I think all of those questions are becoming even more important. I know we haven't really mentioned the word Taiwan and Taiwan Strait. We've talked about the fact that there's no strategic warning time, but implied in that is the likelihood or prospect of a cross-straits conflict and that we might be involved in it. So I think right now, I'm just guessing, but have an inkling of it, that these kinds of questions are being asked now. I think our tendency and preference as Australians has been to be quite vague about it, that it suits us to be vague about our own commitments. But now it's starting to be a point of difference. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Mike.
I don't think the US can ask Australia for a commitment on Taiwan because the US has not made a commitment to Taiwan. You've probably heard of the term strategic ambiguity. Usually it's strategic ambiguity and tactical clarity, which in one form or another, every administration for 3+ decades has had on Taiwan. The US doesn't say that it would automatically respond to attack. It doesn't commit to respond the way we would with Australia or Japan or Korea or NATO. We're ambiguous about that. Part of the reason is the US doesn't want to give a green light to Taiwan. But there's tactical clarity, meaning we have the resolve and the will and the capability and the capacity to respond if it affects our interests. And the Taiwan Relations Act says an attack on Taiwan would affect our interests. I think what the US is asking of Japan and Australia is that second piece, tactical clarity. Let's be sure that we can operate quickly and sustain it if there's a contingency in the region. That gets to the force posture issue. The force posture issue is over a decade old now. It has two pieces, in my view. One is to shape the environment, to make sure that the US and Japan, which is operating from the Northern Territories as well, and others, Canada, Korea, have Australia as an anchor to engage in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Islands, Southeast Asia. It's a platform for shaping the environment, not fighting wars, but shaping the environment. It's also now increasingly becoming evident that it is defense in depth. 20 years ago, Japan was our defense in depth for the US in a contingency in Korea or Taiwan. Japan's now inside the front line. The Chinese threat envelope, missiles, submarines, goes well out to the second island chain and the Pacific Islands in the Indian Ocean. So just the geography dictates that if there's a real crisis, as in 1941 and 42, Australia is going to have the geography to be that rear area to ensure that the other side doesn't think that aggression will work. And one of the things that is often missed in the debate, I find, is how much the PLA warfighting strategy for Taiwan or Japan is a theater-wide strategy. The interest in submarine bases in Vanuatu is not just to annoy Canberra. The interest in Gwadar or Chakpao or other bases, Hanbon Tota in the Indian Ocean, is not just to show the flag. It's about projecting military power throughout the entire region to make it much more difficult for the US or the US and Japan or others to respond to something in the Western Pacific. So, it's here. It's geographically just the reality.
Yeah, great, thanks. Alan, did you?
I'd better be very brief because I've just waved 5 minutes in front of us. I'd like to pick up on only 2 points. First of all, on deterrence. In public policy discourse, and certainly in political discourse, it's often very difficult for people to distinguish between cause and consequence. And it's one of the things that makes the profession in which we all operate so much fun, because we can all talk to each other endlessly, not knowing what we're talking about, because we just confuse cause and consequence all the time. So we say meaningless things to each other, and we say it with great kindness. We use words like social license without knowing what the hell we're talking about. We had a fair bit of that yesterday, and our American colleague in the panel where I was said, would you mind explaining what you're talking about, because it's not a term we use in the United States. And she's a very experienced intelligence official. So social license is just a new word. We can throw it in, we can have great fun with it, with no idea what we're talking about. And I think deterrence is another one of those words. And deterrence by denial, well, good luck with that. I hope it works. But deterrence is a consequence of having a really good force posture. And if it's really good, it will deter things because your adversary knows that they're going to get thrashed. But otherwise, you've got to be careful in using it. The second point, I'd like to get back to is warning. We use warning time a lot, and I'm picking up the question that came from the middle of the floor there. Warning is again, a bit like deterrence. It's a little understood concept in strategy these days because we stick the vector time on it all the time. And we talk about warning time, but in fact, warning has got a whole series of dimensions. There's motive, there's intention, there's capability, and there's time. And each of those dimensions has got to interact in some way. And as one who was advising a government a long time ago about how Australia should respond to the Galtieri War around the Falklands, Prime Minister Fraser was the Prime Minister at the time, and now we weren't a party to that, but we had exchange officers on Royal Navy ships. And that was a big thing for the government to think about. And that caused us to think about the nature of that conflict and why did it happen and would we leave our sailors on the ships and so on. And it was a very interesting problem to deal with because we ended up working out that the motivation factors for the Falklands conflict were 135 years old. And so when you're thinking about warning, you do have to understand the strategic context and the strategic history. And it is a difficult concept to deal with because many of the factors will possibly not be known to those who are actually responsible for developing current warning concepts.
Okay, now we've got 3 more minutes left, and so I am keen just to go back to, I think it was a comment that, Mike, that you made in terms of imagining or asking the question, how can we make the alliance fit for purpose in a contested Indo-Pacific? It gets back to the big question that we kind of started where we started. So if I could just go along, and I am putting you all on the spot here, if I could just go along the line, starting with you, Peter, just one idea, although I know you've got 4 from your Black Swan strategy paper. One
idea, yeah.
You quickly list the 4.
Well, I'm not going to list those. What I'll do is refer to people with the document in my hand, which is the DSR. Section 6.5 has a list of things of what we have to do as a result of our alliance because of that fundamental change. It starts with what we heard many people talk about yesterday and today, a more active statecraft, but it comes down to more joint military planning, increased force posture, and greater discussions and involvement in understanding what we mean by deterrence and how you operationalise those deterrents. So that stuff is in there. I think it's a really consequential period in time for the alliance. It will evolve and change in ways that we have not seen before in its history, because as I go back to the beginning, because the US is not the hegemon anymore. It is a multipolar system, and whether we like it or not, there is a threat out there, because threat is capability plus intent. And there's a country starting with C and ending with A that's not Cambodia, it's not Costa Rica, and it's not Canada, that has done one of the most unprecedented military expansions in the last 100 or more years, is currently expanding its nuclear arsenal more so than any other power since the 1950s. And its leader gives speeches about its willingness to use force and is actually using coercion and other tactics throughout our region. That's why we have to seriously consider these things and rechange the way we're doing and relook at the way the alliance works.
Okay, and just one question, and this is a one-word answer. Just the Youth Council, the NSC's Youth Council, threw this question out some time back. Are fears of US abandonment of Australia real or overstated? Real or overstated?
Overstated.
Okay. Lavina?
I would say that the name of the game is strengthening deterrence, and what we are kind of aligning our level of resolve and willingness to bear risk in terms of deterrence. I think there's still a wide variation amongst allies of the United States and the United States, not just in terms of military deterrence, but also non-military forms of deterrence. So if we talk about whole of different tools of statecraft, we should be thinking about non-military tools as well. I also think the fear of abandonment is overblown.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so overstated?
Overstated.
Okay. Mike?
I've already said fear of abandonment is overdone, but if you want to guard against it, then you want U.S. force posture. You want the U.S. depending on Australia more, is what you want, which is Japan's strategy. Abe, as prime minister, changed the interpretation of the peace clause to allow collective defense with the U.S. because Tokyo was more worried about abandonment than they were entrapment. They wanted the U.S. to depend on Japan. And the Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations embraced that. And so my main takeaway from today, or the word I'd leave is Japan. If you followed the Kishida summit, the U.S., Japan, and Australia have agreed to a common missile defense architecture, which is actually very significant. Japan's presence and force posture, the command upgrade in Japan can, and I think will have an Australia piece to it. The U.S. alliance system in Asia was bilateral. It's hubs and spokes.
Yeah.
For a bunch of reasons. It's now networking.
Yes.
That does a couple of really good things for Australia. It allows Australia to leverage not just U.S. but Japanese power to enhance deterrence, and it allows Australia to leverage Japanese influence to temper American strategy. It's actually, in the long run, although Beijing wouldn't see it this way, good for China that U.S. strategy is now dependent on Tokyo and Canberra, and increasingly now we're finding Manila, Seoul, Delhi. That's actually a middle power, Japan's a great power, influence on the major power that's stabilizing, but also reinforces deterrence and complicates any potential Chinese ambitions for force.
Okay. Alan?
Everyone in
make
this
the
room,
alliance fit for purpose.
including me, is a member of a really interesting self-congratulatory elite. We talk to each other, we get on happily, and we don't have much effect. I think what we need to do is to socialise much of what we think about, get people who are not like us to understand exactly what the hell we're trying to talk about, and to make sure that between these two great nations, that's Australia and the United States, and I'll bring Canada into it too, just for the sake of completeness in this room, to get down to what relationships are really about. And that is about the pursuit of shared interests with the support of a coherent population behind it. They're very big tasks to achieve, and I don't think we're doing it terribly well.
That's a lovely way to end. Thanks, Alan. So, can I just go back to that question from the Youth Council about abandonment of Australia, real or overstated?
No.
Overstated?
We are a fearful country and we just don't want to be abandoned.
Okay.
Since 1788 we've been like this.
Okay. Thanks so much. Fantastic panel. I did tell you it was going to be an interesting conversation. So if you could please join with me in thanking Alan, Mike, Lavina and Peter and...